fantastic gnome like you had to hurtle out of space.
Hello and welcome to another Bad Movie Review. This time we are discussing The Man from Planet X. This is a 1951 cult classic sci-fi film that runs about an hour and 11 minutes. Directed by Edgar Ulmer, written by Aubrey Weisberg and Jack Pollexfen. Now, I had been hearing about this movie for decades before I finally got around to tracking it down and watching it, and I just rewatched it for the purposes of this review. It is a very short film, which means it's usually pretty heavily condensed and either straight to the point or a complete nonsense disaster. And this one sort of falls in the middle. We open with some narration, leading the film to largely be a flashback, and then they get caught up and we progress from there. So we learn that a reporter named John Lawrence got a tip that there was a professor that he's supposed to talk to, and he talks to that professor who explains to him that a mysterious Planet X is heading toward Earth. Now that should be terrifying, but everybody seems to just kind of be okay with it. So slightly unworried about this, John just inquires and decides to go to Scotland to meet with a Professor Elliot, whom he has met before, and Professor Elliot apparently is at this Brock in the middle of a Scottish island that is going to be the closest location where the two planets are going to meet. So John flies out there and meets Enid, who is the daughter of the professor, and they of course hit it off immediately. Eventually, John and Enid are wandering the moors for some reason or other, and they find an alien doohickey. You don't find out what it is until near the very end of the film, so it's kind of pointless, but they just sort of find this MacGuffin laying around in the moors, but it's made of an unknown metal. Now, they can't source any more of the metal, so I guess there's a problem there. Now, John could have stayed at the Brock with Enid and her dad, but there is another person there named Dr. Mears who has been involved in some sort of shenanigans in the past where he may or may not have done some prison time for. It's never really explained what he did, but it's just alleged to be bad. So they set him up to be the more unscrupulous individual, and that is sort of reinforced a little bit through the early half of the film. Well, Enid takes John to an inn in town, and on her way back she gets a flat tire and decides to just wander off. It's a foggy bog moor thing, so that's the perfect place to wander around, because why would you ever worry about falling in a marsh or a bog and disappearing and dying like was mentioned earlier in the film? Nah, she just wanders around, and she comes across a spaceship. Now, she's not immediately terrified like most people would be about finding this strange little Sontaran-looking orb in the middle of nowhere. No, she immediately goes up there and starts looking in the windows like a creepy peeping Tom. And of course, staring back out the window is an alien face, which looks vaguely like some sort of cardboard that would be inserted in a mask that you would buy at a store. So it's very unmoving and kind of uncanny valley looking. So of course she screams and runs off. And like a little tattletale, she tells her dad all about this alien that she saw. She probably left out the part where she was peeking in the windows like a dirty pervert, but you know, that's usually how these kind of stories go. Now, despite having just examined this weird device thing made of alien metal in his laboratory, the professor really doesn't seem to believe her. So she's got to take him out there to nose around. Well, of course, he gets struck by an alien spotlight that's totally not just a flashlight beam, and he gets kind of hypnotized or mesmerized by it, so he's slavishly susceptible to simple command. And that becomes important later on. It was bad enough that they're a family of peeping Toms just nosing around looking in people's windows, but now they have to deal with this alien device, and things get a little more complicated. They talk to John again and tell him about the spaceship, and they go down and nose around the spaceship again, but this time the alien's probably tired of everybody looking in his windows, because apparently he doesn't own curtains, and he pops himself out, and they see the alien in his glory, and he's really short. So you got this guy, I think the actor was actually a horse jockey cocky, but they wedge this poor guy into the sweatiest looking suit possible with this big fishbowl head, and they have an encounter with him. And of course they react accordingly to this alien creature thing, who apparently is having some problems with a regulator on his costume, and they help him so that he could breathe a little easier, and they make friends with him, and then they promptly vamoose, because they figured, they can't communicate with him, so they just take off, and he ends up following them home like a stray little puppy. He probably wanted to go look in their windows and see what they were doing. It's only fair, they've done it to him like 3 times now. Eventually, the alien gets left with the questionably moral Dr. Mears, who tries to communicate with the alien, doesn't seem to get real far, but Mears is a very morally flexible individual, so he immediately tries to torture the thing, and that leads to a series of horrifying events, and eventually people start disappearing. Well, it turns out the alien might be up to some shenanigans, but is it because he had evil intent, or because Dr. Mears was a complete jerk to him? Eventually, things do get resolved in the way these movies usually do in the 50s, but they do try to rally an angry mob, which was kind of fun, but everybody just panics and locks themselves in the house. That was pretty funny. And one by one, the townies are getting picked off, but, they don't really have a lot of actors in the film, so it's not as many people as you would think. And the budget problems are very obvious in the film. Everything looks kind of cheap. The spaceship looked kind of cool for what we actually saw of it. We don't really see the inside too well, and you can tell a lot of the stuff is just sort of painted on. Instead of actually having, functioning machines inside, it looks like it's just drawn on there. But the biggest betrayal is, of course, fog. Because fog and darkness are great ways to hide budgetary issues. We don't have enough money on the soundstage to get some fake trees up, so you just throw up some fog and shut the lights off. And the next thing you know, you've got a sketchy looking moor. And it does appear from what I was able to research that the sets in here are actually left over from the 1948 Joan of Arc film. So in 1950, when they filmed this, they just used what was left of those sets and kind of repurposed them for this film. Probably saved a lot of money that way too. And it looks like this did go over budget. From what I could tell, it was around $41,000 at the end from a $38,000 budget. But it ended up pulling in about a $1.2 million. So it definitely made its money back. And that also means this movie was fairly successful at the box office. And I'm not surprised. There were some really good actors in here that were largely TV actors and low-budget film actors. John Lawrence was played by Robert Clarke, who B-movie fans are going to recognize from The Hideous Sun Demon, Beyond the Time Barrier, The Astounding She-Monster, and a bunch of other stuff. Very recognizable actor. Same with William Schallert, who played Dr. Mears. He was in the Heat of the Night, Inner Space, The Incredible Shrinking Man, and a litany of TV shows. The guy's credits are amazing. He's mostly a bit part actor, but with 390 credits on IMDb, that's really impressive. And of course, Roy Engel, who played the local constable in here with a not-so-good Scottish accent, was in Zombies of the Stratosphere, The Magnetic Monster, and a whole bunch of TV shows, and of course, Switchblade Sisters. Can't forget that one. So you've got a lot of people that are very, very recognizable, who have done a ton of TV work, and are at least reliable actors. And although the script probably could have used a little bit of work, I think it mainly suffers from having a low budget. The alien did look pretty cool for what they were able to accomplish, and let's face it, some teenagers with a pile of junk and a video camera probably could recreate this movie for about $50 today. But considering the limitations of the time that they had to work with within the studio system and the cost of film, this movie did phenomenally well for what was there to work with. There are a few errors. There's a scene where the alien's breathing regulator was adjusted, and you can tell it's from a different scene than what it's supposed to be, just because it looks more like he's lying on the ground, so it's actually cut from later in the movie. Also, when Enid's car gets the tire, it was an actual blowout, not just flat, so when you see John pumping the tire up later with a bicycle pump, it won't do any good because the tire blew. It didn't just lose air. So it didn't show him patching the tire or replacing the tire. They just sort of pretended that was going to do something. Also, a lot of the backgrounds are done with flat canvases, which is pretty common with low-budget films. And there is a scene where you can see the shadow of the boom mic early on in the film when they first get to the Brock. Otherwise, the movie, despite all its flaws, has a certain kind of quaint charm to it. It's very much like a 50s drive-in film, but but it is a little better than quite a few of them. Despite having some narration, the voiceover isn't obnoxiously present throughout the film. It's just a few spots where they actually do that, and it's actually driving the plot forward a little bit just because of time constraints. It's not as annoying as like Varan was, or several other movies. So it wasn't as annoying as it could have been. You just get a little bit of a lurch in your stomach when you first hear the narration. You're like, this is gonna go on through the whole thing, but it doesn't, thankfully. So it is pretty well condensed, but it does have a few things that probably could have been tightened up or shortened, and it would have been nice to see more of the alien. Allegedly, this movie is the inspiration for Steven Spielberg using the musical tones to communicate with aliens in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and that's sort of alluded to that that's how the alien communicates in here, but I don't think it's ever outright said. So despite the whole thing with another planet about to hit Earth or come very, very close to it being a very, very important cosmic event, nobody seems to be real worried about that part. They're worried about this one little alien guy running around that may or may not be causing an alien invasion. They sort of leap to that conclusion early on. The whole thing with the other planet is just sort of brushed aside as like a totally normal thing that happens in space and wouldn't at all disrupt our world, other than like raising the ocean's tides or something. So just kind of shut your brain off for that part, because this movie's like 70 years old, and I guess people didn't know a lot about celestial bodies running into each other at that point. But it was still a really fun film. I had a great time watching it. It's definitely a classic worth checking out if you like the 1950s sci-fi stuff. It did quite a lot on such a limited budget, and the movie posters are really cool. And I thought the alien looked good. I'm kind of surprised there was never a sequel, because there is enough open-endedness to what happened that they could have set this up for another movie down the line somewhere, but they didn't really do a lot of sequels back then. So a pretty strong recommendation on this one. A lot of people don't like black and white sci-fi movies that are this old because they have garbage special effects and super low budgets, but if you're into that, this is definitely one to add to your collection. It's a classic for a reason, and I can see why. So that's gonna do it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future reviews. If you'd like to help the channel out in other ways, links are in the description to various support methods, and as always, we hope to see you on the next one.